Fox News alert: President Trump heading to Kenosha, Wisconsin tomorrow after more violence in major cities, including Portland, where a man was shot and killed near protests on Saturday. The White House says the president is looking forward to helping Kenosha heal and rebuild after deadly gunfire last week during protests over the police shooting of Jacob Blake. President Trump also attacking 2020 rival Joe Biden, tweeting last night, quote, "When is slow Joe Biden going to criticize the anarchists, thugs, and agitators in Antifa? When is he going to suggest bringing up the National Guard in badly run and crime-infested Democrat cities and states? Remember, he can't lose the crazy Bernie super liberal vote." In fact, Biden issued a statement yesterday on Portland saying, quote, "I condemn this violence unequivocally." This afternoon, he is set to speak in Pittsburgh. His campaign says he plans to ask voters, "Are you safe in Donald Trump's America?" Part of his prepared remarks read, quote, "This president long ago forfeited any moral leadership in this country. He can't stop the violence because for years he has fomented it. He may believe mouthing the words law and order makes him strong, but his failure to call on his own supporters to stop acting as armed militia in this country shows you how weak he is. Does anyone believe there will be less violence in America if Donald Trump is reelected?" White House Press Secretary Kelly McEnany is now asking why Biden isn't going to Kenosha like the president.
Here we go again, Democrats ignoring the state of Wisconsin as they did in 2016. This president shows up. He showed up this weekend in Texas. He showed up in Louisiana. He's showing up in Kenosha tomorrow. This president is out and about, reopening the country, demonstrating his respect for the American people by actually going to places where Americans are hurting.
This is Outnumbered, and I'm Melissa Francis. Here today is Fox Business host Dagan McDowell, host of Kennedy and the Fox Business Network Kennedy, syndicated radio host and Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall, and joining us today, former Utah Congressman and Fox News contributor Jason Chaffetz. And Jason, let me start with you, because all through the Democratic convention, the Democrats were silent on all of the violence that's going on in major cities. And it was sort of like, if we don't, it's not going on, it's not a big deal. These are isolated incidents that are being hyped up on television. Now they have made a very strong change in tact. And we saw it last week, even with Democrats that were out on talk shows and the like, with new talking points saying, this is Donald Trump's America. Do you feel safe in Donald Trump's America? He's the one that is responsible for this. Do you think that their response now is effective?
I don't think it's effective. I think these are happening in Democratic-run cities with Democratic governors, and it's been going on in some places 90 or 100 days. The Democrats have taken a clear position. Joe Biden has said that he wants to redirect funding absolutely away from police. You have Kamala Harris in June on audio saying that the violence should continue. Those are her words, should continue. They don't even address it when they have the national audience for 4 straight nights. Donald Trump has been and will always be for law and order. And the mere presence of a president of the United States does not give anybody permission, nor should it trigger you to more violence. Martin Luther King was not about violence. John Lewis, the congressman, was not about violence. But these radicals to the left have been incited, and they continue to do it. And then they try to blame Donald Trump as if it was his fault. It's ridiculous, and America sees through it.
So, Kennedy, in politics, anything that happens, it may snow, one side's going to blame the other, whatever it is. We live in a city where this is going on, and when I talk to people on the street who have noticed the massive deterioration in New York, they blame the local mayor, Bill de Blasio, very squarely. However, some say, when you have these violent groups like Antifa, they're going to continue to burn down these cities as long as Donald Trump is in office, because that's what they're mad about. So it's almost like holding the residents hostage, that we're going to continue these violent acts unless you vote for who we want. Is that effective?
I don't know that that's true. Let's say the president loses in November and Joe Biden becomes president. Does that mean the violence is automatically going to end? Well, what if it doesn't? Then what do you have? What are you left with? And what is the plan if, in fact, a change in administration doesn't yield a change in ideology or action? you have such diminished freedom in places like that. And I look at some of those pictures from Kenosha and Portland and Seattle, and I think to myself, having grown up and lived in two of those cities, you can't walk around at night. At 10 o'clock at night, you can't go get a drink with your friends. You can't go get ice cream with your kids when you have a city that has devolved into that. And I hate to be so cynical, but the only reason there is this condemnation now is because poll numbers are starting to show that people don't like living in a city where it feels like they're on the verge of some sort of a civil war. And for those of us who live through things like the LA riots, you see how quickly things can turn, and it's scary.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I was in LA during the riots as well. I know exactly what you're talking about. Let me ask Leslie, I think that for sane people, I don't think they necessarily blame either national candidate. You sort of look at it and think local law enforcement, local mayors, for whatever reason, let things get out of control. And then it's really hard to get them back under control once you've lost that in your city. Isn't that what's going on, Leslie?
I think what's going on, quite frankly, is radical elements on both the left and the right. And I think that local and national leaders have to, as many have, call this out. But the bigger problem, Melissa, is the bigger problem, which is the underlying problem and reason this occurs, which in the beginning is what people were protesting about. It is the injustice. It is the systemic racism. And this division in our country plays into politics, as we see in the polls, and it certainly plays into the way people are reacting in various cities. Look, I know people say, oh, this is because the Democrats in charge here, Democrats in charge here. I say bull on that. Maybe we can point to those cities now, and because there is some Democratic leadership in some of these cities, but we certainly have seen violence, whether a person is a Democrat or a Republican who is a mayor of a city, a governor of a state, or even president. I'll agree with Kennedy. Look, if you reelect Donald Trump, this isn't going to disappear overnight. And if you elect Joe Biden, this isn't going to disappear overnight. But we do need leadership to come up with something that addresses the underlying problem. Otherwise, this is not going to stop for a very long time, because every time something happens with regard to the police, something happens with regard to an African American as a victim, we see more anger and more protest.
Hang on. Leslie, in which Republican city, where is there a Republican mayor where they're having riots right now? Which city is that?
No, not right. I said not right now. Yes, they are Democratic mayors and governors. Oh. But in the past, we've seen violence in our nation in cities or states that have either a Democrat or Republican, which is why I don't blame the party in power. The individuals that are acting left or right violently are to blame.
Dagan?
Well, Democrats did try to...
Do you think that the violence... How can you say that the violence is a reaction to systemic racism, but at the same time, the violence is coming from extreme left and extreme right? Those things that Leslie just said don't go together, because I don't think people on the extreme right, they're violent because there's systemic racism. That's what's behind all of this. That connection does not make sense. Go ahead, Dagan.
Well, I'll point out it was a Trump supporter who was killed in Portland over the weekend, and his death was cheered by a crowd. A woman screaming, I'm glad that the fascist is dead. So let's remember that. And let's remember that Democrats far and wide blamed President Trump and the presence of federal officers protecting a courthouse in Portland for that very violence. Mostly peaceful protest, except for those doggone federal officers protecting federal property. Well, they stepped back, and guess what? The violence continued week after week because of, in part, no leadership from a feckless mayor, no leadership from a feckless governor, both Democrats who had removed the power of the police to step up and use riot tactics in this instance. And Kennedy, you're not the cynical one. It is the cynicism and the hollowness and the soullessness in members of the Democratic Party that now you would have Vice President Biden and Senator Kamala Harris step up to condemn the rioting and the violence and the mayhem and the looting, but not step up to condemn it when it was destroying people's livelihood. neighborhoods, hurting the innocent, looting businesses that had been in families for generations, that on the surface, it's impossible for these leaders to step up and say, hey, this is wrong, it needs to stop. Only when Joe Biden's lead over Trump in these critical swing states is narrowing by the day. But he is underperforming where Hillary Clinton was in 2016 at this very time in places like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. That is why they're upset now, because they're losing. They don't care about the people who are being hurt by this, the innocent.
Jason, let me ask you, when regular people, when maybe undecided voters or just normal human beings who are not watching this as closely as we all are, when they see something about somebody pouring quick dry cement into the locks of a federal building where there are officers inside and then lighting a fire outside in order to hopefully burn them alive, do they feel like that's the result of systemic racism?
Well, unfortunately, I think there were some very legitimate protests, and I think it's gone too far. Now they've used that as an excuse, and they've turned into riots, and they've become so aggressive, and to the loss of life that happened there in Portland. And remember, in Kenosha, Wisconsin, the police department is reporting of the 175 arrests, 102 of them were from outside the city of Kenosha. So these people are taking advantage of situations, pouring into a city to promote this violence, somehow trying to point to Donald Trump. But I got to tell you what, in the places where Donald Trump and the Republicans will step up and enforce the law, I mean, these are laws on the books. Why shouldn't we enforce the law? You're going to bring peace and prosperity back, and that's exactly what should happen.
All right, the nation's intelligence chief defending his decision to cut back on in-person briefings for lawmakers, the threat he's now facing from top Democrats.
This is not where you cut off Congress from getting the information. I think the House is going to have to subpoena the director of intelligence in order to get information.
Within minutes of that, one of those briefings ending, a number of members of Congress went to a number of different publications and leaked classified information, again, for political purposes, to create a narrative that simply isn't true, that somehow Russia is a greater national security threat than China. We've had a pandemic of information being leaked out of the intelligence community.
Intelligence Chief John Ratcliffe blaming those leaks for his decision to cut back on in-person election security briefings to Congress in favor of written reports. House Intel Chair Adam Schiff denying that he or his staff leaked anything, saying that the lack of oral briefings could lead to the suppression of critical information.
When you can hide behind documents or withhold documents and not have to answer questions about it, it lets you conceal the truth. And in this case, concealing the truth is concealing Russians are again intervening to help the president in his reelection.
Schiff also not ruling out the possibility of subpoenas to force top intelligence officials to testify before the November elections. Jason, I want to point out that the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, they're responsible for aspects of protecting elections from foreign interference, have said that they will plan to continue providing regular briefings to the Senate and House Intelligence Committees in person, according to the Wall Street Journal. So what gives here?
I think John Ratcliffe is actually right. I mean, he's lived it firsthand. He was on the Intelligence Committee. He's now the Director of National Intelligence. What Adam Schiff just said, what he just saw in that clip saying that they were going to withhold documents, that's not what John Ratcliffe said. He said he was going to provide the documents in writing. That's exactly what they've done. And I got to tell you, the only part that I would probably disagree with my friend John Ratcliffe and the DNI in general is, if they have direct information about the leaking of classified information, then prosecute them. File a complaint at the Department of Justice and prosecute Adam Schiff. I have seen it. I have heard it. I have listened to everybody complain about how he leaks classified information. Then prosecute him. I don't understand why he has a security clearance. Nobody's been able to describe that to me, because he has done this repeatedly. He has misrepresented information. It is documented. And he should lose his security clearance. But if he's done something illegal, like leak classified information, prosecute him.
Melissa, I wonder, I'm suspicious, is John Ratcliffe sending the Democrats down a rabbit hole to make them crazy about this? But at the end of the day, they'll still get written briefings at the very least.
Well, I mean, what's interesting is, so the argument they're making a dig, and you know this because you're a reporter, but maybe not everybody in our audience knows this. When somebody wants to leak something to you, they say, hey, I have this intelligence information. Here's what it is. As a reporter, you know that, they may be risking their neck and breaking the law. You're just on the other end listening. When they say they heard it in a briefing, it is very difficult to verify, but a lot of reporters go with it and are tempted. If they say they got it in a document, your first question as a reporter is instantly, well, can you show me the document? Mm-hmm. Can you take a picture, or can we at least meet somewhere and let me see it so I know? Because your editor is going to ask you, it was in a document. Did you see that? Do we know for sure? So to be fair, it is harder to leak things when it's in writing. I don't know that that's really their motivation, but that is a fair point.
Kennedy?
This whole thing it should be very disconcerting, because it's not just Russia, and that's incredibly dishonest, and it's a very wild abstraction from Adam Schiff. I have no doubt that Russia has a desired outcome for the 2020 election, but then again, so does China. And China has a lot more resources and a lot more money. So why are we just focusing on Russia? Why aren't we also looking at North Korea, for that matter, where you have a massive upheaval in leadership, to say the least? So he's the chair of the House Intelligence Committee. He should be doing a better job of telling people what the foreign threats really are, because it's not just Russia that wants to reelect Donald Trump. It's also China, and they're looking out for their interests, and they want a president whom they know is going to be short term, that is going to deliver that for them. My question for Adam Schiff, also as chair of the House Intelligence Committee, why haven't you produced legislation that keeps the country safer from outside foreign influence? Same thing for Nancy Pelosi.
Well, they were busy impeaching the president and having the impeachment trial when the coronavirus is spreading, so they were a little distracted on a number of counts. Leslie, also, Kennedy listed North Korea and China as well. What about Iran? Iran's on the radar, too.
Definitely. Look, here to me, this is absolutely ridiculous, because a written report, although to Melissa's point, I agree with her 100%, is more difficult to leak, it still can be leaked. Here's the problem that I have as a taxpayer and a constituent. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you've elected officials to represent you, and your representation in Congress should be able to ask questions, whether it's about Russia or China or Iran or North Korea, from these briefings. That you cannot do when something's in writing. So this slap on the hand to Adam Schiff, if that's who they are alleging, even though they said members, plural, of Congress, it's really punishing the American people, because we need our representatives to be able to ask specific questions so that they have more knowledge than what's just there on the written page that also could be leaked.
Before we go, Jason, I'll give you final word on this. Marco Rubio, he is supporting Ratcliffe's decision, who, by the way, is the acting Republican chairman of the Senate panel in the Senate side.
Yeah, well, we're in the silly season here up into the election, but somehow, some way, I can understand where John Ratcliffe has got to put a cork on this spew of information that comes out of the intel committees, because there is so much leaking going on, and it has to come to an end. And I think Marco Rubio recognizes that as well.
Thank you all. After months of violence at protests across the country, the Trump campaign says news coverage is partly to blame. Could the media have done more?
The media, complicit in that, ignored it for 90 days, and then all of a sudden, a few days ago, Joe Biden says something about violence in our streets, and it's incredible.
Some of the top headlines now at the bottom of the hour. Chicago police say at least 54 people were shot across the city this weekend. At least 10 killed. 2 Chicago police officers among those hurt. More than 300,000 people in Louisiana are still without power, and more than 200,000 have no water after Hurricane Laura clobbered the Gulf Coast. Utility officials say it could take weeks to restore service. And an El Al plane from Israel landing in United Arab Emirates today carrying high-ranking U.S. and Israeli officials. It was the first ever direct commercial passenger flight between the two countries. It marks the implementation of the historic U.S. brokered deal to normalize relations between Israel and the UAE.
The Democrats have ignored this for so long, and now the media is giving them cover. Joe Biden says one word about it, and they say, oh, yeah, it is going on, and it's President Trump's fault. What a complete scam perpetrated by the mainstream media. We're not going to let them get away with it.
Person Hogan Gidley accusing the media of being complicit in the rise in violence in several cities across the country, saying they ignored it until Joe Biden finally mentioned it. Now, meantime, CNN editor-at-large Chris Cillizza has faced criticism on social media for this tweet. Quote, Trump's efforts to label what is happening in major cities as riots speaks at least somewhat to his desperation, politically speaking, at the moment. In his newsletter, he writes that the president senses, quote, the race is slipping from him and has to cling on to the, quote, events following the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha earlier this month as a sign, not of peaceful protest, but of radical leftists rioting and destroying cities. So who is really clinging to the race here, Jason?
I got to tell you, the media, I totally agree with what Hogan said. The media has been complicit because they haven't been reporting the news. And it's been going on in these cities for 90 or 100 days, night after night. These are not just protests. These are riots by the very definition. I mean, how many memes have you seen online and just jokes about reporters standing in, with flames going on in cities burning behind them, with people throwing Molotov cocktails and, throwing fireworks and attacking police. The mainstream media almost did nothing at the end of the Republican National Convention on Thursday, going after Rand Paul and others that were leaving. And it's kind of disgusting that they don't report it. But I think it was mentioned earlier, polling has finally shown the Democrats that they cannot ignore it and that the media is going to have to say something about it. But the record that the Democrats have on this is horrific, but the media is even worse.
All right, so Leslie, I don't know how you define right 2 months ago or 3 months ago. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we're pointing to is this idea that, I mean, all you have to do is look on the internet and you can see all the places where places like CNN had a banner across the bottom of the screen that didn't match the picture that was on there, where they said, at one time I think they said violent protesters trying to say, oh, and then they took that down, and, you have mostly peaceful, and then behind it are, flames and all kinds of violence going on that anyone could see. That's where all of this fodder came from. I don't think, though, that CNN isn't preaching to anyone who hasn't already made up their mind. It doesn't know how they feel about those pictures anyway. So I don't know that they're not convincing people who aren't already convinced that everything on the screen, everything in the world that's bad, is laid at the feet of Donald Trump. I just think it's interesting the way Democrats, if you listen closely in the morning through the day, all of a sudden you hear Democrats singing from the same song sheet. And they come on the shows and say before, it was, this isn't really happening. It's just a few isolated incidents. And now they're saying this is Donald Trump's America. I think their second try at this is so much more effective and is a smarter message. Do you feel safe right now? That belongs to Trump. It's a tough sell because, as I said, people in my city blame de Blasio, and you blame your local politicians who have let you down by handcuffing police, or vice versa. You blame the local politicians for letting the police get out of control if you think they're behind the violence. But the new Joe Biden message is a smarter one. It might be too late, and I don't know how effective it is from his basement.
Well, we will see. Still a lot of time between now and Election Day, and things certainly are shifting. As millions of Americans wait for help, the White House and Democrats in Congress are still no closer to a deal on coronavirus relief legislation, while the White House Chief of Staff says House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is to blame and how her team is responding. That's next.
I said, what does the 2.2 represent? You know what her response was? I'm not going to tell you. Let me fill in the blanks. That's not a proper negotiation. I had a conversation with Speaker Pelosi, and even on her $2.2 trillion counteroffer, she can't tell the American people nor me what is in that. She puts forth a number, suggests that she came down, and yet she's willing to turn down $1.3 trillion of help that goes to the American people because she would rather them have nothing than to give way on what her fantasy objection might be.
White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows blaming House Speaker Nancy Pelosi for stalled talks on the next coronavirus relief package. Pelosi and Democrats have come down from the original $3.4 trillion bill the House passed back in May, but negotiations have since hit a standstill. A representative for Speaker Pelosi reportedly calling Meadows' comments on their latest conversation misleading, saying Meadows himself did not break down the cost of his offer either. Last week, Pelosi told reporters that for now, she doesn't plan to give any more ground on the relief package. Jason, you know, when you look at this negotiation and the way that it's going around and around in circles, I wonder if neither side wants to get this done. If Republicans don't want to give more relief because they don't want to pay people to stay home and not work, they want to get things open and get people out there. If Democrats don't want to get this going because you know, they kind of want to keep things stalled before the election. Is either side, in your opinion, really trying to get something done here?
Well, I do think that Republicans still have control out of the White House because there are billions of dollars that states still have not yet spent. The president has been clear that things he wanted to do with payroll tax and some other things. But Speaker Pelosi will continue to lose this negotiation in the hearts and minds of the American people when she can't articulate what it is that she's asking for. The government is already going to spend $7+ trillion of the American people's money we don't have, by the way. That will continue to go out the door. And remember, week before last, it was Nancy Pelosi who passed a postal relief bill and then had the hearing about it 2 days after they already passed the bill. I mean, that's how she runs things and why it makes no sense to the American people.
You know, Dagan, one of the things that really bothers me from a math perspective, one of the big lies in all of this is, like the postal relief package, you know, they said that the post office wasn't going to be able to do their job. Well, it turns out they had approved a multi-billion-dollar line of credit with the Treasury. If they really needed money, they were welcome to borrow it. They didn't want to owe it back. Now, when we look at the coronavirus bill, the same thing is true. If states and municipalities are really so desperate for money for schools, for all of these different things, they too, as of July 29th, have a line of credit with the Treasury. It's just they want a gift, not a loan, right?
Right. And to Jason's point, there was $250 billion that was in the CARES Act for states and local governments. $150 billion of it was just a blank check. And then $90 billion more was for schools and for Medicaid and public transit. That's about 3 months of tax revenue for the states. And Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, in that $3.5 trillion, that next package that they passed, there's more than $900 billion in there for the states. So it is very clearly based on estimates of future losses. And it is cover for these poorly run liberal deep blue states. That's one of the reasons that the Republicans push back. But you know what, everybody, we hate them all, don't we? Don't we hate, sorry, Jason, all lawmakers, because they should have come together and at least put something together to stair step the extra unemployment benefits that people were getting, because you still have 1 million people every week filing for first-time unemployment benefits, and about 14.5 million collecting continuing claims. People are desperate, and lawmakers turn their backs on everybody.
Yeah, Leslie, what about that?
Look, Texas and Florida are red states that need the state aid. And I have to say, Melissa, you said that terrible four-letter word math, but from where I stand, she's come down. Democrats have come down over $1 trillion. And Jason, I heard her clearly in the past talk about the $600 a week that would continue for the American people with unemployment assistance, additional unemployment assistance through the end of the year, as opposed to what Republicans are proposing, which is half. And in addition, that money for the states. And that's not just for blue states. That's for states across the board who certainly need aid from the federal government to assist with the essential workers, such as first responders and healthcare workers. So I'm hearing something I guess everyone else isn't.
Leslie, it's all the other things that she also puts in the bill. She puts in there things like for vote harvesting and how they conduct voting and money for illegal immigrants and all these other things that she doesn't want to talk about. Put forward a clean bill and make a case for it, and it probably will pass. But she's got it larded up with all these things that have absolutely nothing to do with COVID relief. Nothing.
Jason, I will say that I agree with you rarely, but I do agree with you on left or right. Putting lard in a bill and additional line items, I'm not in favor of that. Just give the American people in these states what they need.
Yeah.
I will say this to both sides.
I don't think they certainly need anything. Go ahead, Kennedy. Go ahead.
No, there's a phrase, put up or shut up, and I would say this to both sides, put up and shut up. When I say put up, I say put up what is in this legislation. Let us see what's in there. Adam Schiff is talking about transparency in terms of protecting our elections. How about transparency in terms of what the federal government is spending all of this money on? Because I guarantee you a vast majority of it is not going to families who need it most.
No. Yeah, 100%. All right, Joe Biden set to make an in-person return to the campaign trail today as he and President Trump face off over who's better to handle unrest in U.S. cities. We will bring you that. Plus, the Director of National Intelligence with a big reveal on the investigation into the Russia probe.
I'm optimistic that I'll be declassifying additional documents soon.
Intelligence Chief John Radcliffe says that he's been coordinating with U.S. Attorney John Durham in his investigation of the investigators and plans to soon declassify more documents on the Trump-Russia probe. Watch this.
I'm coordinating with him to make sure that he has the intelligence documents that he needs to do his work. And what I don't want to do is declassify something that might prejudice his work. So we're going to have to coordinate as we go forward the completion of his work with my ability to declassify documents.
Jason, what kind of documents are we talking about potentially? And also, when could we expect findings from John Durham?
You hope that the John Durham probe wraps up sooner rather than later, but you can see the complexity of it, and I think he'll do it and do it right. The DNI and John Radcliffe made multiple commitments to senators during the confirmation hearings that he was going to declassify a host of documents regarding the targeting and the spying of Donald Trump and what happened there and the whole Russia collusion fiasco. Senators have been demanding it, rightfully so. John Radcliffe is going to provide that, but has to make sure he deconflicts with an ongoing prosecution, possible criminal prosecution of some of the players.
You just said, Jason, sooner rather than later. If that isn't a politician's answer, I don't know what is. Is it before the election? Is it after the election?
It should have happened a year ago.
Well,
it should have happened a year ago.
Is it going to be before the election, you think?
Like I said, it should have been in about, 2019, so it's overdue as we speak.
Well, Melissa, I'm raising the issue because the closer you get to an election, certainly there'll be accusations of manipulation of the electorate.
Absolutely. I just hope that this doesn't turn out. You got to be careful what you promise and when you say you're going to reveal it. We'll never forget Adam Schiff saying that he has personally seen evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, that it's there, he's seen it, it's going to come out, time will tell. And so many people were hanging on the hook waiting for that. Of course, that wasn't true. He never had it. And so you just want to make sure that you don't hint or promise at things that you're not going to deliver.
I think, Leslie, that Adam Schiff actually said that the evidence of Russia collusion with President Trump was in plain sight even after the Mueller report was released. But what do you expect from Durham and Ratcliffe?
Well, I expect it's an election year. I agree with Jason again. This is scary. Twice in one show, Jason. Look, this should have been done a year ago, but it's not. Why? Come on. We have a general election in November. I mean, and technically their boss is up for keeping or losing his job. I'm sorry, but this just doesn't smell very good, especially with the timing. And I would also agree with Melissa, though, if you're going to make the promise, again, left or right, if you're going to make the promise, you got to put it forth, because the American people aren't stupid.
But somebody like John Durham, Kennedy, wouldn't we? The expectation is that he's, as Jason was pointing out, going to take his time and make sure that as he's put an investigation together and the probe, that he's done the right thing and he's drawn accurate conclusions.
Yes, that's what you want to see. And, you know, I'm glad you can contrast Durham with James Comey. And he's not as much of a grandstander. But what I will say is the impetus for this was mass surveillance. And you can't unring a bell like that. So my worry is that, yes, he will take his time and he will give us his findings, but how is that going to change anything? With U.S. attorneys and inspectors general and Congress, what are they going to do to work together to take back some of the power that the CIA and the FBI and the NSA all have, and they can weaponize it and use it to harm individuals? When is that going to change? And is it realistic to expect to unring that surveillance bell? I don't think it is.
Indeed. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany is set to take the podium at the White House any moment now. We will take you there live. Plus, Joe Biden, former vice president, making his return to the campaign trail live in PA, Pennsylvania. Keep it right here on the Fox News Channel.